Welcome, everyone. My name is Darren Main, and this is the Gay Wellness Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, I'm so glad you're here. In this podcast, we talk to amazing healers of every background who are working with gay men to just live better, fuller, more amazing lives. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Chris Tompkins. He's a psychotherapist, and he's an author. We're going to talk a little bit about his book in a moment. And his website, if you'd like to get to know him a little bit more, is a roadtriptolove.com. And I will also link to all of his social media and, of course, his gay wellness profile so you can learn more about him and reach out with any questions you might have. I will also throw into the show notes links to my work, my website, social media, and so on. Chris, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, Darren. It's good to be here.
My first question, did I get your job title right? Are you a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist? I always get those confused.
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
So we can't go to you for good drugs, is what you're saying.
No.
Bummer.
Yeah, bummer.
Well, welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you about so many things. I thought we'd focus on your work specifically with gay men and some of the key blind spots that gay men tend to have around their mental wellness and sort of self-inquiry. Yeah. I know it's hard to believe that we have blind spots, but we do.
We do.
But I want to ask you briefly, and this is sort of personal, you have a book on raising LGBTQ allies. And I'm wondering if you could just say what that's about, because I have a 13-year-old son.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for asking. It's sort of a passion project of mine. I sort of joke that I wrote myself into graduate school with the book, but basically kind of the long short of it is that I have many nieces and nephews. I'm really close with my family. And a few years ago, I was home visiting my family, and my nephew, who was 6 years old at the time, asked me in front of my family if the woman who was sitting next to me was my girlfriend. And, his version of whispering at the time was talking out loud. So he sort of whispered / talked out loud in front of everyone. So everyone heard his question, and it didn't really strike me as odd in the moment. It was more of just everyone's response and how they heard his question, and then their facial expressions, and then my kind of, wait a second, I've been out his entire life. And so it sort of propelled me on this path of uncovering the nuances of familial homophobia. Yeah. And it also helped me go deeper into my own life, because I had been on the spiritual wellness path for many years, doing a lot of my own healing and personal recovery. And so I realized, because I live in Los Angeles, my family's in Arizona, that there were certain things that I was contributing to in my nieces and nephews' life as it related to being an openly gay man, because I was single, I didn't have a partner. And so he had never met a boyfriend of mine. I've never taken anyone home with me. And so his question, I always like to because I've taught social emotional learning for 6 years. And so I always think that, children's questions are an indicator of what they're learning and what they've learned. And so that was really the book. The book was, it was a letter that I wrote my family that became a TEDx talk. And then after the TEDx talk, I started giving workshops and presentations around Los Angeles County. And then that's what propelled me to write the book.
I'm really excited. I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to read it because, and I think this is a good segue into what we're going to be talking about, is those messages we get early on.
Yeah.
And it's even as a gay man, when I was adopting my son, I remember calling the adoption agency as a single gay man living with HIV and like just expecting them to hang up the phone on me, like not even give me the time of day. And they were super welcoming. They're like, yeah, that's not a problem. Wow. And for them, they had moved on beyond a lot of those ideas about who can and can't adopt. Yeah. But I was still carrying it with me, and I was like so nervous calling.
Sure.
They were like, yeah, you want to give love to a kid? Come on in.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I think we hand that off to people. And I think
Yes.
if we can nip it in the bud, I
Yes.
mean, you may be working yourself out of a job.
Yeah. Yeah.
We want to
Yeah.
raise healthy kids, but not that healthy.
Yeah.
Then they wouldn't need us.
Yes. No. And that's really my hope is with, you know, what you said, nipping it in the bud is really starting with, you know, the younger generation. And, you know, the title of my book is Raising LGBTQ Allies, and the subtitle is A Parent's Guide to Changing the Messages from the Playground. And that's a really important piece, is messages from the playground, because it's an analogy that I use throughout the book, a sort of metaphor to describe the unconscious beliefs that we all pick up, regardless of where we're from, you know, United States or other countries, cultural, age. There are certain collective societal messages that we absorb, that we pick up just by virtue of being socialized in a dominant culture. And so specifically as it relates to gay men, and what I feel really passionate about is helping us explore our own, you mentioned earlier, blind spots, and which I consider as the unconscious beliefs that we all have. Like you described being HIV positive. I myself am HIV positive, and so sort of uncovering what that means is a process of externalizing all of those beliefs and messages. I mentioned before that I taught social emotional learning throughout Los Angeles County, and it was really interesting to me that no matter where I was, what classroom, whether it was an after school program, if the kids were in junior high, high school, even early 20s, there were certain beliefs. Our first class was one of my favorite classes because it was called Who Am I? That was the title of the class. And we had an exercise where they were given a workbook where they would fill out what I believe about school, what I believe about family, what I believe about success, what I believe about money, all of those things. And what was interesting is that, you know, I'm 3 or 4 generations maybe older than them, or decades, I should say, decades older than them. And there were still beliefs that they were writing that I also heard as a kid growing up. And so, you know, that's I think part of the work is to uncover what those are and what really is true for me.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into this a little more deeply, because we've already talked about having you back on for multiple conversations, because I think there's a lot that you can bring to gay men.
Well, thank you.
Who are seeking some peace of mind, some openness to get to Maslow's top of the Maslow pyramid.
Yes.
Everybody knows that you go to therapy and you talk about sex and your mother. Beyond that, though, like, what are the things that surprise, and maybe we'll keep it to like 2 or 3 things that when a gay man comes to you for therapy, and I know everybody's different, but there's probably recurring themes. Like, what are 3 things that people are genuinely surprised? Like, wow, I didn't realize this was driving my behavior, right?
Yeah.
That my addiction, my acting out sexually, whatever it is driven by something.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what are the most common blind spots where people go, oh, that's why I do that.
Yeah. That's a really good question. And I have so many thoughts that are coming to my mind. And I think for me, maybe the 2 that sort of speak to a lot of the clients that I work with are really identifying feeling a sense of belonging. I think there's this sort of, you know, we use a lot of, you know, the gay community or the LGBTQ plus community. And there's this feeling of, in a lot of the cases, clients that I work with, is there's this sort of disconnect. There's this word to describe community that maybe I don't entirely feel a part of. And so there's this yearning, a sort of longing for belonging. And so that's where I really feel called, is to help gay men specifically heal past pain so they can wake up feeling a greater sense of purpose, self-acceptance, and belonging. And I really believe in my own life, it's been my own journey of developing a sense of belonging within myself. And so the other thing I think is important to look at is, as gay men specifically, because of all the external messages that we get, that we're bombarded with from the time we were young, around heteronormativity and what that really looks like. I think a lot of times when we talk about homophobia or equality, those kinds of things, or even being a part of the LGBTQ plus community, we think about homophobia, transphobia, those kinds of things, and uncovering the nuances and layers of heteronormativity and what it means to be a man, or masculinity. All of that contributes to and drives certain behaviors.
Well, in my observation, this is as a yoga teacher and a coach, different than the work you do, but some overlap, some Venn diagram happening there, is that we have a lot of outward looking stuff, like homophobia out there in the world, that this religious leader said this nasty thing about queer people, or this politician is, banning books about gay parents or whatever. And it's important that we have that outward look so that we're like on the lookout for external homophobia. But it seems like we need at least as much turned inward, we've all received those same messages growing up. Yes. And when it's internalized, it's almost like the worst place. It's like the calls coming from inside the house.
It is.
You know what I mean? And I'm wondering how you help people to address that.
Yeah.
Especially now when homophobia out there in the world seems to be on the rise. It's so easy to look at the boogeyman outside ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's such a good question. I think it's so important. And I really feel passionate about this, because that's, I think, one of the big things that I find is missing, is that internalized homophobia, whatever you want to call it, it's a sort of feeling of not enoughness or the shame, that we can internalize about ourselves. And that is, again, going back to my book, is why I was so passionate to write the book, is that children at a very young age, were constantly looking for our parents or caregivers' faces to reflect back to us a sort of joy or delight. And when children don't get those messages, they start to internalize, maybe there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough, or I'm being missed. And so I need to be something other than what I am. And over the years, that sort of creates like psychic scar tissue, I like to call it. And it is a process of sort of unpacking and resolving and healing. And I think that oftentimes we, because it's 2023, sometimes we can feel like we're further along than we are, especially in certain parts. I live in Los Angeles. I live specifically in West Hollywood. And so maybe there's
Are there any gay people in West Hollywood?
Yeah, are there any gay? Yeah, there are. And I think
one or two?
Yeah, one or two, a few of them, maybe a neighbor or two. And I think that is one of the topics that I think is really important to be able to explore, is to the degree that I've explored my own internalized homophobia or my own shame. Sometimes even using that word, I find, can put people off, because it sometimes doesn't even describe what maybe I think that I'm experiencing. And so again, going back to the metaphor of messages from the playground, is that I like to think of it as these beliefs that I picked up about myself that I need to externalize. I need to take out, I need to remove, and I need to heal.
Have you, by any chance, heard the Callum Scott song? I forget the name of it, where he's singing to his parents. It's sort of like a love song to his parents for supporting him for being gay.
No.
And it's like 3 sections from his life, like when his feeling bullied on the playground before he even knew he was gay, and then his friends abandoning him because he's gay, and then coming out to his dad. And I listened to that, and I'm pretty open. I've been out for many years. Yeah. And my family's super cool. Yeah. But I was listening to that, and I was just like freaking ugly crying. And my son, the only other time he had seen me that upset is when my uncle passed away, and he's like, "Dad, who died?" Like, yeah. But I'm like, wow, there's something in there.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
That longing for a different relationship with how I experienced childhood, which wasn't all that bad, but compared to some people,
sure,
that's still in there, and I think that's in there for all of us.
Yes, Yeah, I think too, what I'm hearing with that is there's a sort of grief that comes from, grieving that part that maybe we didn't receive, and honoring that. And I think it's also really important. One of the things I really am passionate about also is to getting, specifically with gay men, is getting in touch with that younger part of ourselves, that little kid version of you that was so impacted by that song. The little kid version of me that still sometimes feels that sting, and rather than judging him or going past that and pushing past that, really honoring those tender feelings and those tender emotions.
Do you, it's both our best quality as gay men collectively and sort of our worst at the same time, our sort of ability to be flip, sarcastic, quick-witted. It makes us really, it's like a defense mechanism that can be highly entertaining and fun and beautiful, and it got us through. And yet at the same time, it can be very dismissive of that tenderness that you were referring to.
Yes, yeah.
And absolutely. I'm wondering if you could sort of speak to how some of what makes us great and awesome and fun to be around is also something to maybe have some awareness around. That there might be something behind it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. That was something, I did my clinical training at the LGBT Center, and I noticed that a lot whenever we would have group supervision, where that's part of when you're going through grad school, you have group supervision to supervise the clients that you're working with and get training around them. And that was one of the things I noticed in my group, is that sarcasm was sort of the currency in our group, even though we were not that we were sarcastic about the clients. It was, the group itself within each other, the therapists were sarcastic, and they would often say, well, we're part of the community, so sarcasm is part of our dialogue or the way we interact. And I didn't agree. I think that sarcasm, to your point, is a sort of defense mechanism. And I think that if anyone's familiar with the 12 steps who's listening, there are, defects of character when you're doing your personal inventory, step 4. And sometimes I like to describe them as our assets gone astray. And so, to your point, is there's kind of the spectrum. And I feel like anytime anything's leaning too far to one side, it can maybe be a defense mechanism or maladaptive or problematic, something that's preventing me from maybe experiencing intimacy as a person. Yeah. And I think that in my experience, sarcasm, I remember I was having a conversation with someone about sarcasm, and I haven't done this myself, but they said that the Latin meaning, I haven't looked it up myself, but the Latin meaning of sarcasm is shredding, or it's like the root word it comes from is shredding, tearing apart. And I always thought that was interesting, because to me, when I think of sarcasm, it's like underneath that is this sort of defense mechanism, tearing apart, which ultimately is a projection of ourself.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for days and days and days. I just love the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And I definitely want to have you back on. Maybe viewers and listeners could suggest some topics that we could address together.
Yeah.
Because there's so many directions we could go. But what I'd love to do is have you say just a little bit about your work, like what does that look like? Is it online sessions? Do you see clients in person? Do you do support groups? I mean, what is your work like, and how could people engage more with you and learn more about your work? And of course, I will put links to all of your relevant websites and social media and stuff in the show notes. But
yeah. Thank you, Darren. I appreciate that. And it's been wonderful talking to you as well. I feel like I could talk to you for a long time. So I'm grateful to be able to have this conversation. But yeah, my website is aroadtriptolove.com. I see clients throughout California, virtually, telehealth, and also located in Los Angeles, I do see some clients in person. and I see clients individually. My primary specialty is working with gay men, specifically to help them heal past pain, so that they can wake up feeling, a greater sense of purpose, self-acceptance, and belonging, like I mentioned. And I also specialize in working with people who specifically want spirituality to be a resource in their therapy.
When you say spirituality, are you coming at it from a specific tradition, or Christianity or Buddhism, or more just generic spirituality?
No, kind of that could be a continuing conversation, but in my process, and that's the name of my website, A Road Trip to Love, is that in my own process of healing, I come from a religious background, so healing religious trauma. I've sort of been on this investigative journey of learning all about different spiritual traditions. And so when I say spirituality, it's the direct experience of your own essence. And so how you access that is very unique to yourself. Yeah.
It's interesting. I talk about this a lot. I'm actually thinking about writing a book on the subject because I teach trauma-informed yoga, but I teach in a cathedral. So I have a lot of people coming to my class at the cathedral, and they're sort of coming from the yoga, but they're getting like this triggered by just walking into a church again. Even though Grace Cathedral is a very welcoming church to all different kinds of people, it's not what we think of when we think of religious bigotry and intolerance.
Right.
It's still triggering. And I see a lot of like what people experience when they're triggered by physical trauma is very similar to the religious trauma. So I would love to have this conversation with you and get a professional opinion on
absolutely
what that looks like.
Wow.
And how you help people to work through it.
Because it is a big thing, especially in this specific in the United States.
Awesome. Well, we are going to wrap, but Chris Tompkins, his website is A Road Trip to Love. I will put links to all of his resources as well as mine in the show notes. I'll even put a link to that Callum Scott song so you can listen to it and cry your eyes out yourself.
Thank you.
Have a good ugly cry on me. And we will definitely have you back on, Chris. You're an amazing man, and I really hope people check out your work more fully.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate that. It's been good to be here.